Anatomy and Physiology, Introduction and Organization of the Human Body. Introduction and Disclaimer. Welcome to Anatomy and Physiology Lecture 1. I have put together approximately 17 chapters of Anatomy and Physiology 1 slide presentations that will be posted at later dates. I hope that this will help A&P 1 students. Please take your time while reviewing this lecture. You may use your textbook to cross-reference. To have a clear understanding of this subject, I suggest you review this presentation before and after you have done your reading. Do not use this presentation as your only source of learning. Listen to your instructor, read your textbook, and take notes. This slide is for entertainment and educational reference only. I am not a teacher. Please see your instructor for any questions that have not been addressed here. The scope of anatomy and physiology. After listening to this presentation and doing your reading, you should be able to define anatomy and physiology and understand how they correlate with each other. You should be able to describe the different ways of studying human anatomy. You should be able to understand the subdisciplines of human physiology. You should be able to discuss the different anatomical terms, body planes, and regions. And you should be able to discuss the homeostatic mechanism, levels of organization, and characteristics of living organisms. Introduction, definition, anatomy and physiology. Anatomy and physiology is, simply put, the structure and the function, the biology of the human body. The Greek word ana means up, tomi means cutting up. So anatomy means cutting up. Anatomy, the study of form, the study of structure. When studying the anatomy, structure of a human being, there are more than 10 different ways to do this. Let's discuss a few of them. Let's discuss the basic. The first one is examination. How are we to examine the structure of the human body? First, we use inspection. Inspection is to look with our eyes. We observe with our eyes. Then there's palpation, which is the touching of the human body with your fingertips. Then there's auscultation, which is listening to the human body with a stethoscope. Have you ever been to the doctor and he places the stethoscope on your chest and he listens to your heart? Or he places the stethoscope on your back and asks you to take a deep breath in and take an exhale, or he asks you to cough? That is auscultation. And then there's percussion, which is tapping of the body cavities and listening for sound. Second, cadaver dissection. Cadaver dissection is cutting and separating human body tissues to reveal tissue relationship. When you are studying structure, let's say in medical school, you have a body that is assigned to the student and they begin to dissect different parts of the body. That way they can learn, observe, and see the different relationships within the body. As an anatomy and physiology student, there's usually a lab associated with studying anatomy and physiology. You may have to dissect. You're dissecting so that you have a better understanding of the position of what things look like of the of the body. That's in relation to human. You may use an animal of similar structure. Then there's comparative anatomy, which is the study of multiple species to learn about form, function, and evolution. A perfect example of this would be the Charles Darwin study. he came up with his theory of evolution. What he did was he cruised and he traveled for 5 years in the Americas and in Europe, and he collected various species of animals, and he studied them. And that's when he came up and concluded with his theory of evolution and relating to animals, and then he associated it with human beings. Anatomy, the study of form, the study of structure, continued. You have exploratory surgery, which is the invasion of the body tissue using an instrument where normally they have a light at the end of the machine and then a little tiny camera, and it's placed in your body, and it is observed by the doctor or the clinician, whoever's doing this procedure. Then there's medical imaging. Medical imaging, radiology is associated with this branch of study. It is using like x-rays, CT scan, MRI, ultrasound. And what they do is they're viewing the inside of the body without surgery. Then there's gross anatomy, which is the study of structures that can be seen with the naked eye, meaning whatever you see, whatever you can see, that is what it is. Then there's histology, which is the examination of the tissues using a microscope. This is called microscopic anatomy. Then you have histopathology, which is you're using the microscope to study tissues for disease. Then you have cytology, which is the study of structure and function of the cells. Then there is ultrastructure, which is using an electron microscope to study specimens. Electron microscopes are extremely powerful. You'll see a lot with the electron microscope. Physiology. Physiology is the study of function. How does it work? How does it move? How does it go? The study of function. With physiology, there are many subdisciplines. Here are a few. You have neurophysiology, which is how does the nervous system function? Then you have endocrinology. That is the physiology of hormones. How does the hormones work? Then there's pathophysiology, and that is how does disease move? How does it work? What is the function of the disease? How does it affect the body? Then there is comparative physiology. Comparative physiology is basically you're going to study different specimens of different species to learn about the body function. You're going to learn how they work, and then you're going to compare it. The basis for much of our understanding of the human physiology and the development of new drugs is because of comparative physiology. Levels of organization. Organisms, in this case, which would be human beings, are composed of organ systems. Your organ systems would be your cardiovascular system, your respiratory system, your digestive system, your reproductive system. Your organ systems are composed of organs. The organs would make up an organ system would be a group of organs for a particular system. For example, you have your reproductive system. That would be your gonads. It would be the testes. It would be the vagina. It would be the urethras, and so forth. Your organs are composed of tissues, and the tissues are composed of cells. Your cells are composed of organelles. Your organelles are composed of molecules. Your molecules are composed of atoms. Do note that the cell is the smallest structure of the human body of what is considered to be alive. So, in other words, just because your atoms and your molecules and the organelles are moving does not mean that they are alive. The smallest structure of the human body that is considered to be alive are the cells. Anatomical variation. No two humans are alike. People are born different every single day. Most common in anatomy books, you would see the common person, what their structure looks like. But again, people are born different. Some people may be born lacking certain muscles. They may have a typical number of vertebrae. They may have atypical organs. For example, a person could be born with one kidney as opposed to two kidneys. Some people, their organs are reversed. This is called situs inversus, left to right reversal of an organ. Maybe the heart, as opposed to, we all know it's normally placed on the left side, but a person can be born with it on the right side. It just depends on Mother Nature. Characteristics of life. Organisms have certain characteristics that prove or show that they are of life. Here are some examples of the characteristics. Organization. Living things exhibit a higher level of organization than non-living things. Cellular composition. Living matter is always compartmentalized of one or more cells. Metabolism. Sum of all internal chemical changes. Anabolism, which is synthesis, and catabolism, which is digestion. Responsiveness. The ability of that organism to respond to stimuli, whether it's irritability, which is some to no response, versus excitability, which is a lot of response. And then you have movement of the organism or of substances within the organism. An example, movement as in the organism itself is moving, how we move our arms, we talk, and so forth. We run, we jump. And the substances within the organism would be our blood. It could be the hormones. It could be your heart beating, your digestion, and so forth. Continued characteristics of life would be homeostasis, which is maintaining a very stable internal condition. When homeostasis is off, it often leads to illness or death. Development, differentiation, and growth, meaning we grow. We get big, we get fat, we get tall, we grow. Reproduction, we're able to produce copies of ourselves and passing those genes off to the offspring. Evolution of the population, which would be changes in the genes and genetics. Homeostasis and negative feedback. Homeostasis, that is the ability to detect changes, both your internal and external environment, and then you activate mechanisms that oppose it, and thereby maintaining a relatively stable internal conditions. When your homeostasis is off, it can lead to illness and death. Negative feedback allows for a dynamic equilibrium within a limited range around a set point. The body senses a change and negates or reverses it. Again, loss of homeostatic control causes illness or death. Homeostasis and negative feedback. Because feedback mechanisms alter the original changes that triggered them, they are called feedback loops. I'm going to give you an example of the following. Okay, please follow along. Listen to the scenario. Let's say you have a house and you're living in your house, okay? Your temperature is set at 70 degrees, okay? So that is the stimulus, okay? Now the variable would be, okay, the temperature has dropped to 67 degrees. The receptor, which is your temperature, now says, it's not 70 degrees anymore. It's dropping. So the thermostat says, well, let's turn on the furnace. The furnace now turns back on. Turns on because now they have to get the body or the heat back to 70 degrees. Once it's back to 70 degrees and the thermometer reads that it's 70 degrees, the furnace goes off and it's back to 70 degrees. Now, this feedback loop is this whole process is going to happen again. Your body is constantly with checks and balances. Okay, that's why, let's say you got a cold. That's the stimulant. They know that that's not normal. Your white blood cells are going to come charging and say, hey, you don't belong here. You need to get out of here. So what happens is sometimes you get a fever. That's the furnace kicking in. And it'll get rid of the cold. It'll try to kill the microbes and try to get rid of the virus and so forth. Then once you start clearing up and getting better, the white blood cells go back into their little corner. The cold is gone. Everything gets back to normal. And then the cycle begins again, whether it's a cold or something else. It's always checks and balances. Homeostasis and negative feedback. Homeostasis and body temperature. If it's too warm, the vessels dilate in the skin and we begin to sweat. We're losing the heat, okay? It cools down the body. If it's too cold, the blood vessels constrict, the skin constricts, and the shivering begins, and we begin to start to feel warm. Shivering is the body's natural mechanism of producing heat. Positive feedback and rapid change. Self-amplifying cycle leads to greater change in the same direction. Feedback loop is repeated. Change produces more change. A normal way of producing rapid change, examples would be childbirth, blood clotting, protein digestion, and generation of nerve signals. So let's talk about childbirth. Let's talk about it in depth a little bit. So let's, for example, say the mother is in labor. So we get the signal, it's labor time, it's baby time, okay? Oxytocin is produced, which is a chemical that, or hormone, I should say, that helps and it does induce the labor. So what happens is the more the baby pushes on the cervix, the oxytocin is produced and it helps induce the contractions. The contractions is what actually helps push the baby out. So the more oxytocin, the more contractions is produced, and then the baby is born. So that is a cycle, and it is positive feedback with rapid change. This is just a step-by-step breakdown of what I just told you in slide 15. Now I'm going to introduce you to specific vernacular that is used when learning anatomy and physiology. Please try to remember these terms, study these terms, because from here on out, this is what you'll be using. These are the things that we'll be studying, and it will help move the course and the presentations along a lot faster. Human body consists of two main portions. You have the axial portion, which consists of the head, neck, and the trunk. Then you have the appendicular portion, which is the upper and lower limbs of the body. You have major cavities of the axial portion of the body. That is the cranial, which houses the brain. You have the vertebral or spinal cavity, which contains the spinal cord. You have the thoracic cavity, which houses the lungs and the thoracic viscera. And then you have the abdominal pelvic cavity, which contains the abdominal and pelvic viscera. Major body cavities. The diaphragm, that is a muscle that separates the thoracic and the abdominal pelvic cavities. Medius sternum is the region between the lungs and the thoracic cavity, which contains the heart, esophagus, trachea, and the thymus gland. The abdominal pelvic cavity contains two portions. Okay, and if you look at the name, you can see it. So the abdominal, which is for the abdominal cavity, extends from the diaphragm to the top of the pelvis and contains the stomach, the liver, the spleen, kidneys, small intestine, and most of the large intestine. Then you have the second part of the word, pelvic, and that is the pelvic cavity, and it is enclosed by the pelvic bones, contains the end of the large intestine, urinary bladder, internal reproductive organs. Here is a diagram that I found on the internet, and it is a diagram of the thoracic and the abdominal cavity. Look at it, study it, try to remember it. It's important. Organ systems. Now I'm introducing you to the organ systems. I will post for each system. I will help you. We will study each system together. With this introduction, I'm just going to give you a little tiny bit of something. Try to remember it. It will help you along the way. So we have the integumentary system, which is the skin. It protects the body. It helps regulate body temperature, sensory reception, and production of vitamin D. Skeletal system. It is the framework. It is the structure. It protects the internal organs. It's the storage of inorganic salts, production of blood cells, support, and movement. Muscular system is very much involved in movement. It is the main source of body heat, and it is the maintenance of body posture. Here is a picture of the integumentary system, which is the skin, one of the skeletal system, and the other of the muscle system. Nervous system and endocrine system. integration and coordination of organ function through nerve impulse or hormone. So, the nerve impulses would be the nervous system, hormone, endocrine system. Right next to it, you guys will see a picture of the first one would be the nervous system. The second one would be of the endocrine system, both male and female. We continue to digestive system, which receives food, breaks down the food, and excretes waste. You have the respiratory system, which exchanges of gas. You have the carbon monoxide and the oxygen. Then you have the urinary system. It removes blood waste, regulates electrolytes and water balance, and blood pressure. Keep these in mind. Look at the pictures next. We have the digestive system. We have the respiratory and the urinary. The next system, reproductive system. Male and female system produce and transport sex cells. Females also provide fetal development and childbirth. You have the cardiovascular system, transportation of gases, nutrients, blood cells, and waste. And now the lymphatic system, which is the transportation of fluids, lymphocyte production, and body defense. So there you have it. I've introduced all 11 systems. Somebody asked you how many systems we have? 11. Anatomical position. This is how you stand. This is what science calls standing erect. You will stand erect, which is standing straight. You will face forward. Your upper limbs are at your side. Your palms are facing forward. That means your thumbs are pointing away from you. Anatomical term of relative position are based on a person standing in anatomical position. This is the correct way to stand. You will find this throughout your books for studying anatomy and physiology. Here I found the little reference of all the systems, the organ systems. Here they have the major organs and the major functions. This is for your reference. You can copy it down. You can take a picture. That's another resource. Body section and planes. This is very important because when reading, you're going to find a lot of terms that are being used as far as positioning. This is very important. Please memorize, study this. This will help you a lot. So you have the sagittal section, longitude cut, that divides the body into left and right half. If you look at the diagram, you will see the sagittal section, sagittal plane. It divides the body into left and right. Then you have the mid-sagittal, which divides the body into equal left and right portion. Then parasagittal, which is a section that is lateral to the midline, and it divides the body unequally to the left or the right. Okay? So it depends on how far left or how far right you make that cut. Okay? Transverse or horizontal divides the body into superior and inferior portion, meaning top and bottom. But for science, for anatomy and physiology, will we use the term superior, which is towards the head, inferior, which is towards the feet. Then you have coronal or frontal sections, a longitude cut that divides the body into anterior and posterior portions. So, in other words, it's going to be cut right down the middle of the head, and we're going to section the head into half. It's going to go right down into half. But we're going to be looking at the front and the back now. So anterior is the front, posterior is the back. Here is a review of a little something prior to what we just did. So we have superior, which is above, inferior, which is below. You have anterior or ventral, which is towards the front, posterior or dorsal, which is towards the back. So if you have your palm is anterior. The back of your hand, which is the top, is dorsal or posterior. Then you have medial. Medial is towards the midline, the middle. Lateral is away from the middle. Bilateral is a paired structure on both sides or on both sides. Ipsilateral is the same side. Contralateral is the opposite side. Proximal, close to the point of attachment to the trunk. Distal is the furthest point away from the trunk. Superficial is close to the body surface, and deep is more internal. I hope this was very enlightening for you, as it was for me. If you like, please subscribe, because there's plenty more to come.